What up, Papa? All right, better turn that down. There we go. Enjoying your time off, brother? You slaying them crappie? What's up, El Cap? Oh man, cool, awesome, man. I guess there's a heart thing runs in the family. My little sister's at the hospital getting a shame done. From the sounds of it, they're going to do another test in the morning, but they told her to be prepared to have a stent placed. So, but she's not even in the contest, honestly, because I had my first stent when I was 39, and I still smoked for another 5 or 7 years after that. Smoking's bad. Oh yeah, she's gonna be fine. Um, the crazy thing, my brother, he's doing a job for somebody right now for the next week, um, on an island off the east coast of Florida in the Gulf, and he sent some pictures and video today, and I'll tell you what, that's some freaking living there, buddy. I mean, not just, I mean, just the fishing alone, freaking amazing. But they came out, and I guess obviously, if you own an island off the coast of Florida, you obviously have money. But this guy came out with a little. My brother said it was kind of like a little tugboat, but not quite as big. But it was a little ferry, and he was able to. So he put his trailer on the ferry and backed it on, and then disconnected it, and then left the truck in Florida, and then the ferry took his supplies and tools and everything out on the ferry, and then they just pulled in and docked it, and then he just um, had his guys go down and retrieve everything that they needed, for the job. But pretty awesome. Mangrove snapper were tasty. The last time we went to Florida, my daughter and I went down to Daytona Beach, and one morning we got up real early and went out on one of those charters with about 30 or 40 other people, and we had a good day. And we actually ended up winning the pool for most fish by weight, and you could only keep fish that were legal for one and edible. Um, so that ended up being kind of cool. Paid for our whole trip. And the other cool thing about that trip was is that I would say maybe there was a couple of other folks, but the daughter and I were the only ones who came out on that fishing trip prepared, and we had rain suits. And I'll tell you what, it made that trip so much more bearable, because I can tell you from past experiences that being out there and being wet on a boat for 4 or 6 hours is can be pretty miserable. And it wasn't really that cold, but sometimes even if it's in the low 60s or mid 60s, if you get a chill, you get a chill. But it ended up being a good trip, and we both caught fish, so that's always good. My daughter has always been my fishing buddy. my son, he liked fishing, but he never. He was always more the guy. He'd go out with you in the canoe, and then when you stop somewhere, that's where he got, I think, most of his enjoyment was is exploring the other side of the lake where there's no houses or whatever. He was always more of a hiking kind of guy. Whereas my daughter, she was always more, I want to catch a fish. I want to catch a fish. So I learned how to fish mostly from my grandfather and my mom because my dad was gone a lot when I was young. And when we lived up in the Pacific Northwest and we went back and forth to Montana to visit her parents, um, we fished mostly for trout. And that's what I remember fishing for as a little kid. And then when I started throwing the newspaper and started being able to afford my own fishing tackle, we ended up being stationed near saltwater. So multiple times in Washington State, and then once again down in California, we were around saltwater. So I learned real quickly and adapted to saltwater fishing, which was completely different animal than freshwater fishing. I mean, you go freshwater fishing, and whether you're in a stream or a creek or a river or a lake, you're targeting certain species, and then you get out into the freaking saltwater, and there's so many more species that you can target, and that at times they're trying to target you. So, but yeah, it's interesting. I learned I was probably about what would I have been, maybe 14, and I would go down to the docks, and there would be these old Filipino men and women, and literally they had a spool of fishing line, a weight, a hook, and a bucket, and then their bait. And most of the time, I found out later they went out and harvested their bait when the tide was out, because it makes perfect sense. If you're gonna use bait from their environment, you're gonna have better luck. So they would wait for the tide to go out, and then they would go out and harvest shrimp or clams or what have you. And but the reason that I started paying attention to them is because I started spending my own money from throwing the newspaper, buying fishing gear, and I'd be out there for hours and catch next to nothing, and they'd go home with a full bucket of perch every single time they were out there, and it was just 2-3 pound perch. But I mean, every time it was the same story. So I started paying attention to what they were doing and started um, you know, going out and getting my own bait just like they were. And I still kept using the fishing pole instead of the the hand line. But they were able to take those hand lines and swing them and throw them and get them into places where it was kind of hard sometimes to get a line with a fishing pole. So I did learn a lot from them. And then the other cool thing, and I don't know if people who don't have um, people in the military to reference this, but there's a thing called special services. And basically, because you traveled around so much with the military, there were a lot of things that most people didn't have just because you were always on the fly. So things like lawnmowers and garden equipment and things like that. But they also rented boats, and it wasn't like expensive mastering the big. Yeah, dialing them in is the key, and that's what I learned pretty quick. Is the quicker you get it dialed in for what you're throwing. And I've made the mistake, and I've been lazy, and I've tried to switch baits and not dial it in, and ended up freaking bird nesting that son of a gun. But yeah, believe me, I know it's a freaking. But that's once again, that's one of the reasons why I always bring 3 or 4 rods, because that way I can save the annoying task of getting it all untangled for another time and still be able to fish. And then the other thing that I did pop up, because I know you do kayak as well. The other thing that I did is I made sure that every time that I went out in the kayak that I brought with me a right-handed reel and a left-handed reel bait caster, because that was the other thing is trying to throw in certain directions sometimes would cause me to get a little bit of a backlash as well. But anyway, they would let us rent like a 16-foot John boat with a 25 horsepower motor from this special services on the base, and you just had to come. You had to have something that you could tow it with. So, but that $25 was for a whole week. So the dock down maybe a quarter mile from our house, I just took a padlock and a chain, and then every day when I came back from fishing, I just chained it up down there to the dock. And there was nobody who had any boats down there at the dock, and nobody ever said anything. And it had, Navy, um, what do they call the number, the registration number? Because all the boats that have motors on them have to have a registration number on them. But that number was, a U.S. Navy owned vessel. So they just let me alone, and that was even more awesome because I was able to get out to where there was even deeper water, and I was able to start catching things like cod and a lot of flounder and different things like that, fish that are really tasty to eat. And that was a big difference from fishing on the dock. And then I found when we moved up to Silverdale, which is up where JB works on the docks, up there where the subs are. When we moved up to that area, I was able to ride my bike down there to where the docks are, where they keep all of the submarines. And as you can imagine, in order to have an area where you dock a bunch of nuclear submarines, it's pretty dang deep. What's up, Beaver? Muskegon, Michigan. So when we lived in Virginia Beach, Virginia, my mom babysat this mean little redheaded kid, and they were originally from and eventually returned to Muskegon, Michigan. And I remember going up and visiting them multiple times and going out to Mackinac Island. And there's a couple of this is kind of embarrassing. So I guess I was like 10 or 11 years old, and we were in Muskegon, and we were at a place called the Twin Lakes. And apparently I got out on a rowboat and got caught in the wind, and they ended up having to call the rescue people to come out and get me and bring me back from the other side of the lake. Yeah, always causing trouble. Always causing trouble. Oh, just 10 minutes from you, Beaver? Stripers on Lake Mead. Now, I've been to Lake Mead, but I've never fished there. I thought it looked like a cool place to fish. Those stripers that I was catching last month down at Lake Palestine, that was my first go around with the stripers here. Normally, I fish down on Ladybird Lake, and you can catch some stripers down there, but they're not as common as they are up in the big reservoir. Up on the big reservoir, Lake Travis, I think the striper record is like 30 pounds. Biggest strippers. See, that went right freaking over my head there. See, a lot of them are now moving off of the nest here. But we also had probably one of the warmest. We had one of the warmest Februarys on history. I think it was like third or fourth warmest. So, I mean, everything was kind of goofed around as far as the spawn went this year. And then that big storm, like I said, when I went up north and went fishing, that big storm that hit the day before we got there, I mean, that messed up all the plans that the white bass and the sand bass had for moving up the creeks and rivers because they just couldn't do it. It was the warmest there. You know, it's funny. We This has been 10, 15 years ago. We took a trip up north of Toronto to go muskie fishing about 15 years ago, and it was like the hottest week that Canada had had in like 50 years. And temperature is a real big deal when it comes to muskie hunting. So the fact that it was so hot drove the fish, into the cooler water a little bit deeper. So it didn't really end up being a great muskie trip, but it did end up being a pretty good. Oh, what the heck? The what's the big fish that they fish for all the time up in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and um, you fish them off the bottom with a jig. At least that's what we did. But we ended up having a pretty successful trip, and um, walleye, yeah, exactly. But the funniest thing was, is this resort that we stayed at was like a 5-star resort, and they like provided each group with their own boat and motor, and you had your own cabin, but you could go over to you'd go over to the main lodge for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it was me and my dad and my brother, or me, my dad, my son, and my nephew. And my son was probably 10, 11 years old. But the funniest thing is the 5-star resort part of it. You'll appreciate this, Papa. Was because of the chef that they had working in the kitchen over there. And I mean, this guy was putting out some cuisine, with a capital C. But the funny thing is my dad is and always has been super, super picky. And on top of that, and this is kind of funny for somebody who's been in the Navy for so long, he can't eat any seafood or fish. It made him gag. But I'm not kidding you. This chef was putting out some of the most amazing food that I had ever eaten at that stage in my life. And I mean, lobster bisque, and you name it, all top shelf, 5-star resort kind of stuff. That when you think 5-star, that's exactly what they were serving. But my brother, my dad and my son, both being picky eaters, for the entire week had the kitchen cooking them freaking cheeseburgers and chicken strips. Flicker shad and suspending jerk baits. Well, what we did is when we figured out that the muskie weren't going to be any good. Oh yeah, oh yeah, those dudes are huge. We had and it's kind of funny because it was one of the guys who wasn't on the trip with us. We did for many years. We would do a trip up to Lake of the Woods in Ontario and rent a houseboat, and usually about half the guys were fishing and the other half were hunting. And on this particular trip, I think it was one of the first ones we did, but this guy who was a part of the hunting group had made this a giant obnoxious fly. I mean, this thing was just so huge that there was just no way that you could possibly see a fish, eating this thing. And on the second day that we were out, we had taken one of the smaller boats and gone off and tried to get back into some coves and stuff to do some fishing. And we came back, and they had a 50-pound freaking huge pike. One of the biggest pikes I've ever seen. Thing that was well over 36 inches long. But he had caught it off of that big giant fly. And he said it was on the second throw. He said he just saw a spot from the boat, because we had the boat tied off on the shore. He said he saw a spot from the top deck of the boat that just looked juicy, so he decided to try it. And on the second cast, that thing hit it. And none of us caught a fish bigger than that the entire trip. And he never fished again the entire trip, which was kind of funny. But we did do really good with the walleye, and seeing as how I believe Pops was paying for that trip, or no, we split the first one. But I know Pops did end up catching a really, really big black bass on that trip. So as far as our group went, he caught the fish of the trip. We did a fun one here a couple years ago with the kids. There's a lake down towards Houston called Conroe, and we found a guide on the World Wide Web named Catfish Killer. Had his own bait and everything, catfish bait. And I hired this guy and me, and I took the three kids out. And at the time, they were probably, I don't know, ages 8 to 13, 14. Um, but this dude had the system, man. I don't know if it was the bait. I don't know if it was just because he knew where the spots are, or if he was chumming them up, or whatever. But we filled up a cooler, like a um, pretty good size, average size beer cooler, big, 3 foot across beer cooler. Filled that thing up in like 4 hours, and it's funny because normally I would have paid for somebody to clean them, but I was like, oh, this will be a great teaching lesson, teaching the kids to, clean the fish. And holy crap. I mean, it was, I think there was like almost 60 fish. By the time I was done, my hands were so freaking nicked up and sore from, doing something that you're not accustomed to doing. I bet that muskie was 60 pounds. Yep. I've seen some big ones. I've never hooked into one, but we've been on to them on several trips. We've been on to some pretty good sized muskie. People in our group have hooked up before, and I've seen some. I don't know if they were 60 pounds, but I've seen some, definitely some 40 to 50 pound dudes getting pulled out. The big ones that we used to fish for, we lived out in Northern California right before my dad got out of the Navy. Between the town we lived in and Concord, where he worked, was another little town called Pittsburgh, and it was right on the Delta, where it would come out of the Bay Area. So Delta saltwater, and my dad had access to the old base, the old military base there in Pittsburgh, which was kind of, 90% decommissioned at the time. But we were able to go out there on the weekends and fish for sturgeon off of their docks. And there were a couple times that I hooked onto fish that were well over 100 pounds. And we generally didn't use barbed hooks because we knew that if we got one of these fish anywhere close to the dock where we could get it up, it would be too far for us to be able to pull it up without having a gaff that was 25 feet long on a stick, because we were fishing from so high up. And so by not having a barb on the hook, usually about the time you start pulling them head first out of the water, they'll give it a shake, and almost 100% of the time they'd shake the hook right there at the dock. But the cool thing was is you'd get to see them, and if you didn't pull them out, you could swim them around a little bit and get a really good look. And it was funny because I was telling my daughter this story a couple months ago when we were out fishing, and she was like, "I don't believe you," because I was telling her how these sturgeon are like prehistoric fish, and some of the ones that we would bring up next to the dock were like 7, 8 feet long. And she was like, "No, I want to see a picture. Show me a picture." And I was like, "Well, I don't have a picture." And she's like, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, back then we didn't have cameras on our phones. We didn't even have phones, that we could take with us. The phone was at the house." I said, "So in order to get a picture, you'd have to take it from a camera and then get the film developed. So even if I did have a picture, I'd have to go find it in a box somewhere or in an album somewhere." But she thought that was funny. So I learned from some cousins when it came to the big sturgeon fishing and the big fish fishing. I learned from some cousins who were down in the Portland area, Gresham, Oregon. Um, and they took me out a few times on the Columbia River fishing for sturgeon. And then we went out deep sea a couple of times with them as well. And they taught me about all that big heavy duty reels and rods and things that I had no idea I needed. That was one of the reasons why I was kind of wanting to do some of the lives from out in the shed, was because like the entire ceiling of the my shed is like covered in fishing rods and reels, all held up there with bungees and rubber straps. Oh, it was awesome, man. It was awesome, and then even if you just went up off of the Columbia Gorge area and you just followed, like if you saw where water came in to the gorge and you just followed water away, and I mean, I just found some of the most amazing little spots that, I mean, the locals probably knew about, but um, that was one of the cool areas. If you go along there, I think it's Highway 84 that goes along the Columbia River. But one of the cool things along that area is like if you see a river that comes on into the Columbia, usually you can take your truck and you can get back up on these back roads, because most of the area up in that vicinity is all agricultural. So the roads are made big enough so you can get a tractor trailer around. So I was able to pull off quite a bit over the years when I was driving a truck, and just park on the side of the road and then walk down into the, to the river or the creek or, wherever. Um, I never really trespassed too much. I always tried to find, what looked like public access. Yep. Well, there for a while, I was going to the thrift stores, and I could find a bunch of little kids poles super cheap. So I was getting those fishing poles and fixing them up, and then donating them to like Cub Scouts. And I actually there's I haven't done it lately because honestly I think all the kids in my neighborhood already have fishing poles now. But when we have a little fishing derby here in Austin. I volunteered at that a couple of times. That's a pretty cool little deal. The one thing I haven't done yet, because well, we tried once, but it failed. But I have not fished down on the Gulf of Mexico here. Um, the fishing is supposed to be really good for like sea trout and redfish and things like that. And I've watched the guys fish off the jetty. But the one trip that we were going to take for what is it? I think we were going after reds, but we had planned on doing like an 8 hour charter, and I let each of the kids bring a friend, and we were down at Padre Island, and we were camping, and I brought the trailer, and we were at the KOA down there. And after we had dinner that night, the wind started kicking up, and we knew it might be rough the next day, but it wasn't really looking like it was going to be bad. And I'll tell you what, there was a couple times that night I thought the trailer was going to be get blown into the bay. And probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, we got a call from the charter company, and they said that there was no way, that they were already showing 8 foot to 10 foot swells, and that they would refund my money within 6 hours or whatever. But um, so we ended up not doing a. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, there's a place right down on the coast. I think it's in Rockport, that my nephew and I have on our list for this year, and it's a lodge, and um, there's a woman who runs the kitchen and does all of the cooking, and you can rent an individual room or you can get a room in the bunkhouse, and then they have six or seven different options that you have for fishing and hunting, I guess. They do some hunting as well, but you can like have them take you out on a boat. um, you can have them take you out on an airboat. You can go out and do wade fishing. You can fish out of their creeks that run down into the Gulf of Mexico, but the creek runs right next to the lodge. Um, or, and I think there's a couple of other options, but then the one that we want to do is you can bring your own. You can bring your own kayak, and then you can put in right there in the creek, right next to the lodge, and that takes you right down into the bay, and then you can go down there and fish. So we're gonna hire a guide the first day, and then use his knowledge that he teaches us to fish a couple days beyond that. But it's pretty reasonable. I mean, considering, and the fact that we have our own boats, our own kayaks, makes it kind of nice. Yeah, I even saw. I'm not sure if it was Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives, but it was Guy Fieri, and he was down there. And I do think it was actually Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives, but he was down there in Galveston with a friend of the family, and that friend took him and his boys out fishing, and they caught a crap load. And then the cool thing, anytime you see something with that guy Fieri, he showed you how to cook them too, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, that's a big deal down there. There's another spot that I want to fish here in Texas, and I think it's called Caddo, Caddo. I think it's called Caddo Lake State Park, but it's over in the southeastern part of the state, and it's a really swampy spot. And the fishing reports is what's got me excited because the fishing there is like super super good. But I've never really gone out in the kayak anywhere where there's gators, and there's gators at Caddo Lake. And I don't know that I'm paranoid, but I also think that that's a point where you make a decision. And yeah, you could say, okay, well, I've been out on the ocean in my kayak and there's sharks, but I don't know why. For some reason, it just bothers me a little bit more that there's gators. Yeah, crazy, crazy. Well, you know what made it so that I wasn't as worried about kayaking out there um, was when I started snorkeling, and I used to go out and I would follow. Um, I would follow the groups that were teaching scuba divers how to scuba dive, and they would usually go out, for starters, like 30 or 40 feet deep water, but they would swim out from the shore to get to that water. So I would follow them out, and then I would see how far down I could go with just my snorkel and my fins. But after going down there and swimming down in the deeper water, I guess for whatever reason, I just didn't have as much of a fear of it as I did before. So I've been able to go out, and being a military, a Navy kid, I was always in the ocean. So it was kind of one of those. And yeah, just like being in a lake, from time to time you'll feel stuff that's alive rub up against your leg, but never had anything grab onto me yet. Knock on wood. But my brother, he lives in Lafayette, and I'm not sure where this spot is. I know it's probably about 20 miles outside of Lafayette, but I think it's out where his daughter bought property. My niece bought property, but he's been going out there and doing some hunting, and he's finally got a Facebook page, but it's private so that he likes to show off his guns and stuff. And I know a lot of places don't like people showing pew pews, but I guess by putting the settings on private, you don't have to worry about getting dinked by the people who want to control everything. But he keeps everything on private. But he was showing a hunting trip he was on a couple weeks ago, and there was one spot where there was probably 30, 35 gators in the water in this little cove, and he just rode right by on his, his four-wheeler with his dog, and I guess he says it gets his dog worked up, but his dog's smart enough to not go in the water. Yeah, Arkansas is another one of those crazy places. Um, I think probably the last time that I saw um, my dad's mom, my grandma Gladys, um, her and the boys had moved down to Evening Shade, Arkansas. And I remember we went to visit. They didn't even have any running water, but they didn't live that far from the river. So I remember that, but I remember all the snakes. I remember a lot of freaking snakes. Um, the one that intrigued me the most was the black racer. That thing was just the most freaking. I mean, if you blink, they were gone, man, and they were long. Arkansas River. And see, I really haven't done a whole lot of. I've done a lot of creek and stream fishing, but like when I think of a river, I think of like a big, river. I really haven't done a lot. There's a few places around Texas where I've done a little bit of river fishing, but even when I was up in Washington, there were a lot of big rivers up in Washington. I really didn't do a lot of river fishing there. So really, the Columbia River Gorge would probably be the biggest thing that I ever fished, and even that we always fished from the shore. So even if you're running 3 or 4 ounces of weight, I mean, you're only going to throw it so far across the river. But like when we lived out in Oregon, there were like all of these like they weren't rivers; they were like streams and creeks. But the thing that I think I remember most about fishing up in Oregon was is you'd be standing out in 3 feet of water, and after a little adjustment time for your eyes, I mean, it was so crystal clear you could see everything all the way down to the bottom of the creek, and that was one of the coolest things I remember. There was for the first time, like seeing fish following your bait in, and then hitting it, and being able to see it occurring. Um, but even up there, I mean, I did a little bit of ocean fishing and like some streams and stuff. But like when I was in Oregon, most of the time I lived up by Klamath Falls, so that was a big giant lake. The one I always wanted to fish up there was Crater Lake because it was so deep. I always thought that would be cool to fish, but from what I've seen, it's not a very productive lake as far as the fish go. Probably because they have so much habitat to. Yeah, El Cap. When I was trying to think if I was 21, I think I was. I think I was 21, and I worked at the gas station up there in Yosemite, and at the time, they wouldn't allow the motorists to pump their own gas. So that was one of the jobs you could get hired in to do, and they provided you with like a cabin and food, etc. And I spent the summer up there working at that gas station, and it was quite an experience. Um, but I do remember when we were out and about, there was a ton of snakes. And I remember seeing king snakes out in California too. They were the ones that I would most commonly see. Yeah, I guess this is a way to put it. Um, uh, 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 the the uh, the road runners that were out by our house when we lived in. What's going on, Melton? The road runners that lived by our house when we lived in inland in Southern California, in Fallbrook. Um, you'd always see them running around with the king snake in their mouth. So I got one more week of fine arts class, and then finally, after a full year, I actually get to start working on my major. So I get to start working on some cybersecurity stuff. So that's actually kind of got me excited here. Nope ropes. Yep, that's exactly right. What's going on, Marty? Well, I'll tell you what, Papa. I had one. Me and my son were out fishing, and I had one early in the morning. Big old nope rope, try and get in the boat with us. And the funniest thing was, is I know my son got such a kick out of that because he saw pure fear on my face, and I know, if, for a kid, that's a cool deal, for him to see that. But he got quite the kick out of that. I ended up smacking it with the oar and hitting the side of the boat real hard. It scared off real quick, but that was a big, big snake, and I to this day don't know what it was. Um, but the funny thing is I got back at him. Um, I know you guys, especially you guys that got kids, will know what I'm talking about. But at the water parks, the bigger water parks, they have the big water slide that's got the funnel, and it shoots you out from the side, and then you go way up the side, and then eventually you go down to the end, back and forth, and then you go out the spout. Um, the first time we did that at San Antonio, Six Flags Over Texas, um, he was with his back as we were going up. His back, so he was at the very top, but his back was to the direction we were headed in. And that first time when you go up the side, you go so far up because you've got so much energy going that it almost feels like you're going up too far and you're going to come out. Well, I got my revenge because the look on his face probably was similar to the look on my face when that snake tried to get in the boat with us. And my daughter saw it too. And her and I just laughed the whole rest of that day because of the look on his face because he thought he was a dead man. Spring forward means fall back for me, I guess, in lifetime. Oh, really? So then, so then, let me ask you this. So then, um, what time does Kaimano boy go on? What's up, budget guy? Is he getting ready to go on right now, or does he not go on until midnight now? Because I was cruising right along with this old online school and stuff. It used to go live for me at 9, which I guess is 8 now. Huh. Well, I went on at 10:15, which is 10:15 for me now. Um, yeah, so that it kind of stayed. It stayed the same. So yes, Maddie, it is you, and I'm not surprised at you. It's funny you say that, budget guy, and I'm not sure because I really don't mess around with all this stuff yet. I guess I could start doing so, but apparently, um, apparently when I go on Jerbs, when he does his lives, apparently he can't see me. So I've been joking that I've been using my invisibility cloak, but it's kind of funny that he can't see me because I'll come in and start chatting everybody up in the lives, and he'll just like get this confused look on his face. I know it's got him a little frustrated. So, Maddie, if we would have planned this out a little bit better, I didn't realize that Posty was going to be here in Austin over the weekend for South by Southwest. And after he was already here, and I'm sure done gone, the next day anyway, I saw that he was downtown for South by Southwest, and it was for. He was with a group of like 5 or 6 people that looked like I don't know. Maybe it was for a movie or something for the South by Southwest Film Festival. I don't know if he did music for a movie or if they did a movie about him or something. But he was downtown in front of the Paramount Theater. And if I would have known, I would have went down and showed him your knife and, tried to get you some exposure, bro. But we didn't plan. And he still hasn't replied to you, has he? I bet it's because there's no lanyard hole. Exactly, Papa. And for those of you who don't know, that's how Maddie and I met. Was in stall number 3 at a Glory Hole bathroom at a truck stop in Phoenix. He was coming out, and I was going in. And then we had coffee and a donut afterwards in the truck stop cafe. Papa, he is Mike. He is Mike. Kind of like he has a name on the socials. Same thing in the G hole world, man. Same thing. All right. G hole world fact. There's a there's a there's 3 things on the south side of Austin along I-35 that have been here ever since my folks moved here in 1989. There's a trailer park. It's changed names a couple times, and that thing has been there. In fact, my parents stayed at it before they found their first house here in Austin back in the day. And then there's an adult bookstore. And even though we've gone all digital and everything, that adult bookstore has always been there and always been busy. I don't know if it's a meetup joint, whatever. But I always laugh because that's how I found out that Fleshlight was located in the Fleshlight manufacturing facility was located right here in South Austin, was because they had a big sign on the side of their building that said home of the Fleshlight. And I was like, what do you mean home of the Fleshlight? Well, then I found out that South Austin, Texas, is where the dang things are made. So there's the bookstore, there's the trailer park, and then there's a massage parlor in there. And from what I hear, um, for the last 40 plus years, they love you a long time. And I think it's kind of funny because it, you hear all the time about these things getting shut down all around the big cities, San Antonio, Austin, Houston, whatever. But this place has been flying under the radar. I probably just got him in trouble now. Is Fed Harrison here? No? Okay, we're good. Eskimo brother. What's up, Cole? Yeah, it's crazy. I always remember there being like a small homeless population here, but over like the last 4 or 5 years, it's gotten so crazy. There's a guy and his buddy that I've been following on Instagram, and I guess at one time they were both homeless, and they're trusted in the community, but they've been going into some of these homeless shelters that are down in the woods, but all around the city. And oh my God, I did not realize how big some of these. They were showing one that was 1,000 square yard footprint that this group had created in the woods just outside of a city park. And the crazy thing about it is they had a similar 1,000 yard footprint prior. And then once they used it all up and got it so filthy that it was uninhabitable, they moved and took over another 1,000 square foot spot in the woods. And now it's gotten to the point where they one time were like camping underneath of the freeways and stuff. And now under all the freeways in Austin, they're starting to put up like 6 foot fences with razor wire on top of them so that nobody can camp there. But now they're going all back into the woods. And it used to be, like I said, there was a little bit of homelessness here. But now seeing how big some of these homeless communities are, it's just freaking crazy, crazy, crazy. And then the reason I was telling you that is because right, probably about 2 miles up the street from me, I think it was Thursday or Friday last week, right across from the grocery store where I do my like where I have my pharmacy and everything, and I do my shopping. Right across from that grocery store, there was a SWAT situation, and a crackhead. He was a 6'4" tall black man. He was completely buck naked except for a crack pipe and a lighter. And he walked right into these people's house, right through the door. Didn't have the front door locked. And then the woman ran out, and the man, I guess he stayed inside, but eventually ended up coming out also because the guy was off his rocker. Well, I guess the big deal is that the people who own this house had quite an arsenal in one of the bedrooms, which apparently the crackhead never figured out the entire time that he was in there. But they ended up calling in SWAT, and he ended up being in that house for almost 4 hours before they could get him out. And so, needless to say, it's kind of escalating a little bit here. And here in Austin, we don't see much in the way of immigrants at all because they're as eager to get out of Texas as they can possibly be. I don't think they're too fond of the governor here as a general rule. So they generally don't hang around this part of the country too very long. So the majority of the homeless people are just like addicts and a lot of mental people who have mental health issues. But it's gotten kind of next level here recently. Last night, my doorbell, what was that called? Ring doorbell. Um, it alerted like 4 times between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. And it must have been like a ring of kids who were hitting all the apartment complexes and breaking into cars, because it was like 4 times over that 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. period. People reported seeing kids going through the parking lots and not like checking doors like they used to. I mean, these guys are just dropping windows. If they see something, it's like psh, done. And then they just hit a parking lot with like 3 or 4 dudes and are out of there before the cops can even get there. It's a rod of God. Captain Crack Sparrow. Well, the funniest thing I think I saw is one of the local reporters who was reporting on it, the homeless guy, said that he was present when the police brought the man out of the house. Um, and I think that the reporter said, with his noodles swinging and everything. Oh, I was just dying, man. Strapping in and strapping on. Yeah. Well, I don't think my dogs would probably, I got those pug boys, and I don't think they would do a whole lot as far as defending me, but letting me know somebody was hanging around, they would definitely let me know. And then that's all I need to do is, have a little bit of warning, and I'm good to go. I'm not worried about it. Mike the chili dog shit. All right, y'all. I mislabeled this one as Tuesday Late Live number 8. It was actually Tuesday Late Live number 9. So we're going to have to rewind this and go all the way back to the beginning and start over. I can't think of another way to fix that problem. Or I guess I could just put 10 next week. That would fix it. All right, we'll see y'all over at Sharif's Casa here in a little bit. Thanks for showing up, man. Appreciate y'all. Peace.